This is Gemara Baba Basra, Daf Lamid Aleph, and we're holding on the very, excuse me, the very tab of Lamed Aleph, Amid Aleph, and we're in the middle of going through numerous stories, bringing out different aspects of the rules of Chazakah. So we're on the tab line of Lamed Aleph, Amid Aleph, and it sort of leaves out the introduction and dives right in. There are two people disputing ownership of a piece of land, and each one claims that it belonged to their father. Says the Gemara, this one brings witnesses that it belonged to his father. And this guy brings witnesses that he ate and he lived there for the years of a chazaka. But he did not have witnesses that it belonged to his father. So we have a clash. Reuben has Eidim it belonged to his father. Shimon has Eidim that he lived there for 3 years. What is the din? Amar Rabba, Malo l'shaker. What is the reason for the one that's living there to lie? Meaning, he claimed it belonged to his father. And the obvious question is, but then he only brought Eidim, not that it belonged to his father, but rather he brought Eidim that he lived there for 3 years. Says the Gemara, why would he lie? He could have said, it's true it belonged to your father, but I bought it from you and I was there for the years of a chazaka, and he would have an emanis for that. So therefore he's believed and it's his piece of land. Amalei Abaye. Says Abaye, what are you talking about, Rabba? Mali l'shaker b'makam eidim le'amrina. And the whole namanis, the whole idea that one has a credibility to say, I could have said something else, and I didn't, so believe me to what I'm saying now. Says Abaye, that only works if it's not being opposed by Eidim, but it's being opposed by Eidim, that they're Eidim, they're saying that it belongs to the other guy's father, you lost your Malul Shaker. So Hadar Amar Le, so Rabba responds and says, you're right. In Davoscha, that the one living in the land can say it's true. It belonged to your father, Vizavante Minach, and I bought it from him. And that which I originally said it belonged to my father was why I felt that I was so right. I was so reliant and seimech on this field as if it belonged to my father. So again, originally they both said it belonged to their parents. Reuven has Eidim to that. Shimon has Eidim that he ate the years of a chazak. So originally Rabbah said Shimon has credibility. He's living there. He has Eidim. He's there for 3 years. Malay l'shek. Abaye responds, what do you mean? But it's opposed by Eidim. Rava retorts, you're right. But now he could say back to him and say, you know why I originally said it belonged to my father? The reason is because it's Aisaimech. I knew that I'm going to win as if it belonged to my father. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Tayin v'chazer v'tayin. Ayin tayin v'chazer v'tayin. Ask the Gemara a fundamental shaila. How does it work in Bezdin? Can you have one taina, one claim, and then come back with a different claim, or not? And of course, this is coming as a direct segue to the words of Rabbah, that Rabbah taught us that he could change his taina. Originally, he said it belonged to my father, but now he could say, really, I ate the years of chazak. I was just so convinced it was mine as if it belonged to my father. So seemingly changing his taina. So Abaye Ula Amar says, the Gemara 12 lines down, the first line is Chayzer Tayin v'Chazer v'Tayin, whereas Nahardoi Amri says the Yeshiva of Nahardoi Einoi Tayin v'Chazer v'Tayin. So a machlokes between Ula and Nahardoi, whether you could change your taina, and says the Gemara Maida Ula and Me Teichod Amrei Shalav Vayisai. Once, if one of them said it belongs to my father, and it did not belong to your father, then then you can't change your taina. If he said explicitly, it was my father's and not yours, he can't change his taina and say, oh, what I really meant. What do you mean you really meant? You said explicitly it's not the other guys. And furthermore, it says, Ula, and furthermore, it says, Ula, when he's standing in Bezdin and he did not say such a taina, he went outside, Vitayin, and then he comes back inside with this interesting idea saying, oh, I just meant that I own it as if it belonged to my father. My taima. We have to be chayshish that maybe he got out of Bezdin and his friend said, what do you mean? You could have just said that you own it like it was your father's. So therefore, he does not have credibility. So two cases that Ula was Maidem. Continues the Gemara on the flip side, Umaydin Hardai. Mardai, who says you generally cannot change your taina. There, Maideh Echadamerlei. If he said it was my father that bought it from your father, then the chayzer v'tayin, then he's able to go back and say what I meant. What I meant was that I was so sure I would get the land. And similarly, the nardayer maida vecha de ishtai mili abrai. They're maida that where they're discussing it outside, they walked out of the bezdin. V'loitan, he didn't say anything. V'asala beidin, and then he came back into Bezdin. V'tan the chayzer v'toyin my taima of an inishlo megali tan I'll say. Meaning, elu beidina. If outside of Bezdin was where he didn't say anything, but then he came back in and he did, then we believe him because people just sometimes outside of Bezdin don't want to say what they really hold. And Amr Narda Amr Amemar Amri Ano Nahardoyana Severely the Toyin v'chazer v'toyin says Ameimar, even though we just quoted Nardai that Einoi Toyin v'chazer v'toyin, Ameimar argues and Ameimar says you could. The Hilchasa concludes the Gemara 8 lines from the end of the Amid Toyin v'chazer v'toyin that you're allowed to change your claim. Continues the Gemara, the 2 dots, 8 lines to the end of the Amid. Zaymer shalav oisai. V'zermer shalav oisai. Hay si sadi da avasei v'ach l'shtei chazaka. V'hay sadi d'ach l'shtei chazaka. So one has Eidim that actually belonged to his father and he was there for the years of chazaka. The other just says Eidim is there for the years of chazaka. Amar Rav Nachman uki achila lebahadi achila. We put the two chazakas, they each have the two Eidim, they each have Eidos that they ate the years of chazaka, so the two of them counteract each other. Vuki aro b'cheskes avasa. And then once they cancel out each other, then we could put the land in the possession of the father, like the one that had Eidim to that regard. Amar le Rava says, Rava ha'ed is mocheshesi. What do you mean? How can you say those Eidim have any credibility? They're contradicted Eidim. Amar le Amar le Rav Nachman responds, the Eidis chashav achilasai. You're right that they're partially contradicted. Klabi the achila. That's true, but as we turn over to Lamed Aleph and Beis, says Rav Nachman, he wasn't contradicting Klabi that nekuda. Klabi the detail that he said it belonged to my father, that he has good Eidis. So you're right that regarding the fact that he ate the years was contradicted, but not the fact that a prior belonged to the father. Says the Gemara, Lema, let us suggest on the top line of Lamed Aleph Amid Beis, Lema Rava v'Rav Nachman beplukta to Ravuna v'Rav Chisda kamifligi. Suggest the Gemara that this machlekes Rava and Nachman is not a new machlekes. This is an old machlekes Ravuna and Rav Chisda. De'etmar, we learned the Gemara in Shavuos. Beis ki de'edim amachishim zeh, two groups of edim that contradict each other. Amar Ravuna. This one comes on his own and testifies. So Ravuna says it still has a credibility to each one on their own. They have no nemanos. They were contradicted, so they're not believed at all. So suggest the Gemara that Rav Chisda says the no nemanos is like Rava, and Rav Nachman is like Ravuna. Explains the Gemara, no. The two are not dependent upon each other. Ali, but the Rav Chistikul Amlay Pligi, keep Pligi, Ali, but the Rav Huna, Rav Nachlik, Rav Huna, Varava. What's he going to respond? Ad Kanlo Kama Rav Huna, Ela Leidus Acheres. Avlo Isa Edis. That's too much. Lo Yihadar Asi, Lo Yihadar. Avlo Isa Edos, Loi. For that same Edos, there will be no Namanis, meaning even Rava will be masking to such. Continues the Gemara, Hi Isi Sadi Tavasahi. So what do the Brisa say? The Brisa said this one has Eidim that belonged to their father. Omer Rav Nachman says, Rav Nachman, Ano Achtine Anan. Says Rav Nachman, we put the one who won the court case into the land. Anan Maskinalei, we're the one that said he won originally. So Anan Maskinalei, now we got to do due diligence and we got to remove him because they both have Eidos on their regard. Anan Achtina, excuse me, one more time. Says Rav Nachman Anan Achtina, Anan Maskinalei, Zilus Beidin Lo Chashinon. And of course, what's the obvious concern? That if Bezdin first is basking yay and then basking nay, Bezdin saying you are the rightful owner, then Bezdin saying you have to leave the field, and look, devalues the value of Bezdin that they're wavering back and forth, but still says Rav Nachman, Zilus the Beidin Lo Chashinon, we're not worried that it's going to result in a disgrace to all the courts. So Masiv Rava asks Rava Vitema Zeira Shnayim Oimrim Meis. Shnayim Oimrim Noimis. What happens if two people said a husband dies, two people say they didn't? Shnayim Oimrim Niskarsha, Shnayim Oimrim Niskarsha, they're fighting about a divorce. Harizaloiti Nasli, now to remarry. In this case, they don't get divorced. Nachbar Rav Yesi, Omer Teitze, they get divorced. Omer Nachbar Rav Yesi, Vemas, and Omer Teitze, when do I say they have to get divorced? It's not Shabo Edim. And then, but what if he got married first? Then they do not have to get divorced. So answers Rav Nachman, Amar Le, no Savri Lemevid Ovda. I thought to do a similar story, but now that you asked us from this Brisa, Vosvinon, Rav Amnuna Besuria, Loy Avdin Ba, Ovda, we're not going to paskin like this to allow the original Psak Halacha to stand. Again, just to speak out, what was the kasha? The kasha was that we see that Bezdin is now worried about changing the court, changing their original ruling. On that, Rav Nachman responded, I want to do the same, but now that I see your kasha, I see Rav Amnuna Beisuris kasha, we're not going to change the halacha. We are worried about Zilusa de Veidina, and therefore we'll leave the court, leaves the psak as it stands. Says the Gemara, even sell nothing of it of them. Nachman went out and took action, changing the psak. Manda chaza savartu usibiyadei. One of the thoughts saw that originally made a mistake. V'loyi, it's not true. El mishon d'Italia ba'ashlei ravervi lamaisam. Rav Nachman did it because he was based on literally great ropes, and therefore when he found that that was not the case, then he went back on his din. The Tanan, and with this we conclude. Rav Yudah Omer, Ein Ma'ilin Lekun Al Be'ed Echad, Omer Rav Elazar, Ein Masai, only b'makayim sheish Ayrin Makshein. Ayrin Ma'ilin Lekun Al Be'ed Echad. Rashbag Omer Shimon Shimon Askan Ma'ilin Lekun Al Be'ed Echad. Rashbag Hanu Rav Elazar. Chaytem Ir Echad. Even Rav Elazar Savar Ir Echad. And Rashbag Savar. Let's leave this last part. We'll pick it up from here in the next year. B'siyata Nishmaya.